Now, the babies placed in baby boxes make their way into the adoption process. To discuss this larger system or the business, we are joined by Patricia Knight-Meyer, an adoption reform activist and author of Wonderland, A Black Market Baby's Rise from the Rabbit Hole. Patricia, you were listening in on that conversation. I have to say, I was listening to your pre-interview with our producer, Jassim, for the show, and your story really gave me goosebumps. Can you just tell our audience a little bit about who you are and where you came from?
Okay, great. Thank you for having me on this show. I am what's considered a black market baby. I was relinquished during the baby scoop era, which is a 30-year period from the 1940s to 1970s, where 1.5 million mothers relinquished their children. In 1970, the year that I was relinquished, there were 175,000 babies put up for adoption, and about 11,000 of those babies were actually sold on the black market. And what that meant for me was that I was handed over along a Texas hospital curb with no agency, no paperwork, no judges involved. My adoptive parents basically just drove away with me and spent their entire lives looking over their shoulders, fearful that someone was going to come back for their baby, because I was never given any paperwork. And later in life, at 13, I learned that I did not have, my adoptive parents didn't have my birth certificate or even know my true birthday. And at 18, I learned that there was no legal adoption ever occurred.
And why was that? Why did they never have the paperwork?
Well, you know, my adoptive parents were not your typical perfect families that the adoption system wanted for babies at the time. They were a mixed race couple. My father was a meat inspector, middle income. They were put at the bottom of very, very long waiting lists for babies. So they hired they went around the system and hired an attorney who represented both parties. And when they drove away, they thought they were going to be paying what they owed and then be receiving paperwork. 2 years into the system, a year and a half or so, the attorney was extorting them for more money, and never delivering any paperwork. They got fearful that they were either going to have to go to the police or just disengage with him and raise a paperless child. And so ultimately, that's what they did. I ended up finding my biological family once as I got older, and I was able to finally get my first birth certificate at 47 years old. Up until that time, I was using what I believe to be what's called a delayed certificate of birth that was obtained with false facts. And then,
so Patricia, sorry to jump in there again, but this raises a question. How common is your case?
Of the 175,000 babies placed the year I was born, about 12,000 of those were black market babies. So I would say that there's a lot of people out there like me who are having trouble getting birth certificates, getting passports and things like that. So it's more common than you think. And even now, it's a $30 billion industry that's for profit, that isn't highly regulated. A lot of this can happen, especially when you have attorneys that are representing, private attorneys that are representing both sides, the adoptive parents and the birth parents. And for every baby that's relinquished, there are up to 45 babies. There are up to 45 adoptive parents wanting that one child. So it gets very competitive. And when you have one person who can play both sides against the other, there's a lot of room for corruption and coercion to take place. So I do believe that these problems do still exist. And internationally, international adoptions have declined by 95% since 2004. And that basically increases the demand for babies domestic babies in the United States. So we are a commodity, and we are treated like a commodity. And that's something that through my adoption advocacy, I blog at myadoptedlife.com. These are the sorts of things that I'm wanting to raise awareness for. And if I may, I'd like to speak a little bit on my view on the birth boxes.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, absolutely. What do you think of the baby box? Where does it fit into all of that?
I can't speak to what's happening in South Africa. I know that here they are very underused, but my primary concern is for these young mothers who are in a crisis of their own, who are going through a very difficult psychological and possibly are in physical jeopardy from giving birth, God knows where, in secrecy. They need help. And I don't know that they're getting the help they need when they're relinquishing children to these boxes. Who's looking out for them and what's going on with them through that process? My biggest one, actually, though, is that it strips the birth father from having any rights whatsoever to that child. And fathers have just as much rights to the child that they created as a first mother does. And when a child can just be dropped off randomly, that basically just cuts the birth father completely out of the system. You saw my reunion with my birth father there. He was 70 years old and never even knew I existed. And when I was relinquished, he was already raising a 4-year-old son. And he said, had he known that I existed, he would have raised me. And I would have been raised in my family with people that I look like, with no mystery around my adoption. He and I did have 11 wonderful years in reunion together. It was absolutely fantastic. But we both mourned those years that we do believe we feel were stolen from us.
We want to look at it from what you were mentioning there, actually, from the side of the mother, that of a parent. Abby gave up her baby in an open adoption, a practice where the biological and adoptive families have access to each other's information. But she says she was manipulated into giving up her baby. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is Abby, and I am what society commonly refers to as a birth mother. Open adoption, the concept of what it is and the promise of what it could be, is used by adoption profiteers as a coercive tool against women in crisis situations to make them feel as though they have power within the legal process of losing their power. Open adoption is not a legally binding contract, meaning hopeful adoptive parents can say literally anything they want to a woman who is considering relinquishing her parental rights and choosing them as her child's adoptive parents. And then once they've gained the power, once they have the parental rights, they can literally not follow through with any of the things that they promised her or insinuated, nothing. There's no legal ramifications for them turning tail, running away, and never speaking to her again. So when adoption profiteers try to make a woman feel as though there is power in her decision, as though she is empowered in choosing open adoption and developing relationship prior to delivery and relinquishing her rights, they are lying to her, they are manipulating her to feel as though she has a power that she in no way will legally have on the other side of giving up her parental rights.
Patricia, this unfortunately has to be the last answer. We've run out of time. But first, I want to get your reaction to that. Are women being coerced into giving up their babies? Is there enough support? And I suppose as a quick follow-up, is the institution, is government doing enough to give women support in dealing with this?
I absolutely do believe that there is a lot of coercion around birth mothers. I've met Abby several times at the adoption conferences that I speak at, and it is a very common story that there is a lot of coercion and pressure. In my birth mother's generation, it was about shame and societal norms. Today, it's basically telling mothers that they are financially unworthy of mothering if they don't have if they're financially unfit. And I would like to see a lot of the $16,000 tax credit that we give adoptive parents go towards supporting these first mothers who are being post jobs forced into giving births that they are not financially prepared for. But if we're going to do that, we need to help support them financially through a temporary crisis, because right now we're applying a permanent separation as the solution to what is truly a temporary financial crisis for these moms. Sociologist Gretchen Sisson, in her book Relinquished, she did a 10-year study on first mothers and found that as little as $1,000 would have made the difference to the difference between relinquishing and keeping their child. So when I think about $22,000 baby boxes, what that money could do to go to help one mother just for a year, maybe get her feet off the ground and get through the toughest part of bringing a baby into the world. So I would like to see our legislation support first mothers as well.
That is such an important and powerful point to end on. So much to talk about. Thank you so much, Patricia, for coming on and sharing your story. And thank you for being part of this important conversation. For me and the entire Stream team, I'll see you soon.